I've been sitting with like some of those like complicated nuances of like trying to divest from capitalism, but shit, everything is capitalism.
One thing that I think about all the time is that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. And the first time I heard it, I was so fucking pissed because I thought that I could make all these decisions individually that would, you know, lessen the harm upon other people. But it doesn't come down to me as the individual to change the system. Like, we really just need everyone to agree that this is not working for everyone.
Yes,
and
yeah.
you know that that's never going to happen because so many people are profiting from it. But then at the same time, to simply just say I'm not going to do anything anymore because there's nothing I can do doesn't really satisfy me either, since there are decisions we can make in terms of, you know, consumption. So buying less, actively not hoarding products.
I'm laughing because COVID and the toilet paper and the paper towels.
Yeah.
I mean, that is out
Papergate.
of control. I'm just like, what is, you're gonna need something for your chest more than your ass? Like, I just, like,
I don't know any better.
Toilet paper.
All right,
Okay,
all right.
but it's
Cool.
so easy to get into that mentality. I remember when I saw toilet paper at the store for the first time in like a month, I wanted to take 3 home with me, and I thought, the fuck do you need this for? Like, what's your problem?
But I mean, come on. There's like, you've been in the toilet on the toilet. At least I've been on the toilet that one time, and you go to reach for the toilet paper, and you're like, oh shit, there's none there, and you like lift up. Oh shit, there's none under there. Are we out of toilet paper or?
But do you need 36 jumbo rolls at a time?
I'm trying
But
to
it was
help
the last
along.
pack on the aisle.
Well, why did you need the last pack on the aisle?
Because my white privilege tells me that I'm entitled to that.
Honestly, I just think we are unable to see that if we all just purchase things at a reasonable volume, there
As
will
we need it.
forever be enough for everyone. Like, why are we panicked? I see
Because
paper
like
towels.
bulk is fancy. Like, let's buy in bulk, y'all.
Oh, so true. Like, what? We pretty much incentivize bulk purchasing.
Hello and welcome to Permission to Be.
Let's hit him with the remix.
Oh, well, y'all gotta change
Yes.
What do we do?
Becca, like, go to town on some questions.
Yeah.
Like,
Let's tell some stories.
The elevator pitch I've got for it is how to live a good life while your whole life falls apart.
okay.
Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, and I think out of the overflow of the spirit, the body does.
Challenge some narrative.
Why is that the best that God could offer you?
Mike made it very clear that he did not want to get any of these questions beforehand. So he is getting this question live, raw, for the very first time.
This is...
And I feel like art is the expression of the heart where words fail.
Wow.
Oh my goodness, I have tears. Oh, y'all are killing it.
Unfiltered. Permission to be.
Actually, my literary agent, when we were talking about what book might I write, he was like, I mean, A Black Man with Hope is an interesting book.
Oh, shit. Yo, what up, friends? Welcome to the Permission to Be podcast. I feel like every time I do an intro, I can't get through it without like laughing or
Do you want
chuckling.
me to turn off my camera so you don't feel like laughing? I'm gonna laugh.
We got another friend of the pod coming on. Actually, this is my friend Vicki Fanibi. What's up, Vicki?
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Do you want to tell them the story of how you came to be on Permission to Be?
Sure. I don't remember what I first messaged you. I'm pretty sure I just said, "Hi, Tommy, can I be on your podcast?" And you said, "Yeah." And so now I'm here.
Is that easy? Is that easy, y'all?
It really is, folks. Well, for the most part.
For the most
Like,
part.
I will say that as I'm putting my 9-year-old to bed tonight, he asked, "Have you ever had anybody on the podcast that is like mean and like you don't like?" And I said, "No, like we kind of we talk to people and find out." He's like, so would you have Trump on the podcast? I said, "Nobody."
Oh no, we censor him. Yeah,
We censor
censorship
that
all the way.
shit up
He does
all
not
the
need another platform.
No,
He has enough.
no. Why?
I know, but that's just crazy that we had like I was like, no, we don't just let anybody be on the podcast.
So there is some vetting. Thank goodness.
There is some vetting. So Vicki passes the vetting process. So Vicki, in addition to being a stellar human and a great friend, we said she is a regular smuggler girl. Her words, not mine. But also, Vicki is a young urban planning professional, and I guess we'll get to unpack some of that. But on a serious note, what I really love and adore, and there was no hesitation when Vicki was like, "I want to be on the podcast," because the knowledge and care in which Vicki walks through life is absolutely phenomenal. And as we talk about what does it mean to center the voices of Black women, I think that you exemplify why we need to do that. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
The beautiful thing about this is I have no idea where we want to start this conversation because we already started talking about some amazing things. So...
That may or may not make it to this part.
Might have to do some magical editing. Very little, because we try not to edit too much. But tell me, let's unpack what does it mean to be young urban planning professional? Because when I think about urban, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, that's typically synonymous with Black.
Well, funny you might say that, because Black people have not been centered in urban planning work at all. I'll say that it's hard for me to say something about urban planning because it's so vast, and you have all these little touchstones within it in which people focus on. But planning has an incredibly racist history, as pretty much everything you've ever liked. You go back and you're like, damn, that's pretty racist origin story.
Yeah. Yep. Every day learning something else.
All the time. But urban planning was definitely a tool of segregation. So you have zoning policies that contributed to discrimination, where people said that you didn't want to house Black people, or you had predominantly Black communities that were underserved, so they wouldn't bring resources into the community. They had a lack of green space, poor environmental protections. So some of the cases that are popular would be Pruitt-Igoe, which was one of the most prominent affordable housing communities developed in the US. And if you ever have the time to do a quick search on it, it ended in disaster. There's so many little like case studies throughout time from urban planning in which you have low-income communities, and instead of focusing development around how you can bring them up and improve projections for their economics, their healthcare, you just decide that we're not going to spend money on it because it's not worthwhile. And I mean, they don't think urban planning was very, and actually I'll say that it still is, but it's very much so focused on profit. And I could go on forever about this, but when we talk about things like gentrification and affordable housing, a lot of people haven't moved past the idea that you won't always make money from helping other people. You won't always make money from affordable housing. And sometimes you honestly just have to subsidize it. You have to just give it to people because they can't contribute to the community in a way that they probably could if they had consistent access to shelter. These are things that happened, prior to when I came into planning. However, over the last 5 years that I have been studying planning and am now working at a nonprofit that does advocacy for equitable development, a lot of the conversation has shifted not just into zoning, not just into affordable housing, but into transportation as well. So how can we ensure that people in low-income communities actually have transit? So you look at DC, and we have low-income communities in which people are essential workers that don't actually have access to transit. That transit-oriented communities are the most expensive to live in, but these people who live in these transit-oriented communities necessarily don't all necessarily go into work. So you have folks who, so much of it is like a system of here's a need, and here's us not meeting it. And then the reason for that is racism, discrimination, funding, and the people who are in charge of making these what could be monumentally life-changing, equitable decisions are like white people who live in communities that don't want to be tainted by low-income housing. And so some of the biggest shifts in the last few years have been to upzone, so getting rid of single-family housing, which would allow for denser, more affordable developments. You have people who are pushing for mixed income housing, so ensuring that you don't just build affordable housing in random spots. So there's a common trend in which people will build low-income units or like a purely affordable housing complex, but they'll put it in an incredibly inconvenient spot. So they're going to, whatever they've saved on housing is now going to be spent on transportation. So ensuring that, so taking into consideration access to opportunity, healthcare, whatever else that people need in a city. The 15-minute community is getting more popular, so ensuring that you can get to every single essential resource within 15 minutes of walking. So I can, get to the grocery store, walk, get to work, walking, daycare, walking, all of those things. And then there's also been a push to center the needs of marginalized communities. So we're getting a lot of planning departments that are Black, and they focus on Black communities. We're seeing more people say that I treat the city as a client and I'm the therapist. So when I am trying to assess its needs, it's not in terms of what can I just give you and see what happens over time. I am sticking with you and constantly reevaluating what we can do. And to me, when I think of planning and what I want to see happen with planning is that I want more of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to happen, but I do think that people are slowly becoming stagnant with how it's going to happen. So I could talk on and on about how my job, while I came in with really idealized views, I've realized that the same people who are talking about equity and development don't actually care that much about it, or they have what I consider to be very, very limited views, very limited scope of what could happen over time. So for example, we try to have a discussion about how we can fold in Native communities in our work, since so much of what we're doing when we talk about equity and growth is happening on Native land. And we try to, say, like, if we don't acknowledge the land that we're on, if we're not including Native communities into this work, we're no better than what we've been trying to address over the last 10 years or the last 20 years. And people just are not vibing with that. They think it takes away from existing struggles, which to me is kind of insulting, right? Because Native struggles are like present day struggles. So I'm just
when you look at the numbers, like they're the most killed by the police. Health disparities, they have the greater number of health disparities, and
sex
just
trafficking numbers,
like just on every single metric, like indigenous Native people are getting discarded, like not even pushed to the margin, just simply discarded. It's disgusting.
Yeah. Or another thing is that we focus a lot on incentivizing developers to want to build affordable housing, which I get that they're the ones who would be investing in that, but I think relying on a developer to meet the needs is kind of stupid. Like, I mean, I
wonder why.
I work in a developer coalition, and so I have been on these calls, and they all seem like fine people, but in the middle of a pandemic in which people are struggling to meet rent, the fact that I have to listen to these people go on and on saying that, like, I am not getting money from my renters. Of course you're not. Like, shit's terrible right now. When cities
people are dying.
Yeah, when I think that municipalities should be the ones responsible for providing this. Like, if there is strong enough need for whatever resource, not even just housing, public space, health facilities, things like that. I don't know why we've spent so much time creating tax credits or funds for developers and people who may not even be local to do this work. When if the city actually gave a fuck and got their shit together and the federal government actually provided great subsidies, things like that, they could handle this very much so on their own. But because it's not the case, so much of the conversation is, okay, well, let's give this developer a 25% tax credit on the first year that they build this. And then that way, when they build this 200-unit apartment building, we will have 25 units that are below market rate. Then the others will be above market rate. And then on top of that, the materials for building incredibly expensive, so they have to make the money back somehow. So whatever low-income units are made available, they're going to increase the rate of other ones, which will then increase, to me, I don't know, I haven't really tested this theory, so I hope that nobody checks me if they ever listen to this podcast, but to me, it seems like it's not going to have that great of an impact on the neighborhood. It just doesn't make sense to me. So every day I'm at work and I'm thinking, this seems unimpressive, or I think maybe I'm bad at math, but I don't understand how this will actually change anything. And it's all just like, these are the things I think about all the time, and maybe I didn't explain it very well, but that's
no. I worked in Nashville. When I lived in Nashville, for a year or so, I worked for a developer they treated me as an employee very well. But what I didn't understand is that those units or those condos in that high rise, that small percentage that was affordable, were still way more than I could afford or qualify for. And Nashville has, well, I think it's going to change, or maybe it has, but this was 10 years ago, has horrendous public transit as far as availability. And so I'm like, so these units are for white people just getting off their feet after college? Like, I don't understand what the units were for. Like, I don't, thinking about that, I'm like, what was the purpose of providing lower income units and to purchase? And these were to purchase, these weren't apartments. And so these were to purchase. And, it was this big thing like, oh, we're doing this nice thing. And I'm like, but you're not really.
It's really interesting because as you're sitting here talking, like I'm learning in real time, and things are sort of firing for me. The last person that we had on this podcast, Ray McKinnon, one of his interests, in one of his areas of justice work as well, is housing justice. And when I think about, I don't know if you saw the economic mobility report that came out a couple years ago, in which they ranked like cities.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so like Charlotte was like dead last in that ranking. Yeah.
It always
Oh
tops the
god.
list of growing cities for young professionals to move to, though.
Right. White young professionals.
Thinkers, yep.
Anyway. So, but it in understanding these, hearing you talk through some of that, and I've been able to listen to some of our city council meetings where they talk about like zoning and how transportation begins to intersect with this. And I've also been to, I guess, some more progressive cities. Like currently you live in Washington D.C., right?
Mhm.
And they have some policy where a percentage of each building has to be set aside for affordable income.
Depends on the development, because
Okay.
like for you, if you want to use, for example, the low income tax credit, I have to reread the rules, or like any other tax credit incentive. It'll say either the entire structure has to be below market rate, or you have to have this proportion be below market rate, this proportion be or at market rate, and then this proportion be above market rate. So sometimes you get a mix.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But not only that, I think what was really shocking to me was to recognize the influence that citizens of cities have in housing development. But we actively create policy that shut people out from affordable options. And we actively create policy that prevents transportation options for going into certain neighborhoods. And I can't help but think about during the campaign, 45 alluded to protecting the suburbs quite often. And when he said that, like my mind immediately went to housing justice. Because so often we look at suburbs as like the picture of what, this is who America is, this is the American dream, and then we
For
go
white people.
Right.
The picket fence, the house with all the white people in the front yard playing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the suburbs are incredibly segregated spaces. The cities are becoming, like, there has been a shift in which low-income people of color have been pushed out of urban areas because those are now incredibly walkable, profitable spaces.
Which is what's happening here.
Yeah, it fucking sucks because, these areas that used to be considered dingy, dangerous, are now getting an influx of, young white people, sometimes retirees who just want to be close to the action. They get an expensive condo, or people who used to live there vacate their homes. The home is knocked down, and then you have a brand new luxury tower going up in its place. And so when Trump said that, right? So there's been he was just saying, white people, I'm going to protect your assets. Because the worst thing that could happen to someone, right, who owns a property is that you have other people who are enjoying the same luxuries as you. You don't want to share that stuff because then it's not a luxury anymore, supposedly. But come on. Everyone deserves...
Have to live in community.
Yeah. Everyone deserves housing. That is to me, that there's no reason why someone in the States should be unhoused if they didn't want to be. We have every resource available to us to ensure that every single person has a home.
Say that, amen. Yes.
It's just a matter of us not prioritizing that. And it's really mind-boggling to me, right, that people are disgusted by the sight of those who are unhoused because you don't want to see them on the street, but to actually put in policies and support and vote for policies that would ensure that they get housing is just unfathomable to people.
Oh, well, the thing that as offensive it is to them to see people on the street, is more offensive for them to be directed to give their money to helping end it.
I personally don't care, right? You tax me to put to house individuals. I don't give a shit. Like, that's how it should be. I'm
Yeah.
not upset about that. Like, why would my life enjoyment be detracted upon knowing that somebody else was able to access housing or shelter at a lower rate due to my tax payment? That doesn't make sense to me, because I know how good it is to come back after work, enter a space that is my own, use a bathroom that's my own, and sleep in a bed that's my own. So I don't really understand how we as people who claim to be empathetic or wanting to see the success of others would just not want to support something like that. I think about this all the time. Like, shelters are not meeting the need. We know that. And yet people are saying, like, I want, what'd you say?
Dismally so. Dismally so.
It's terrible. They're
Well, and
terrible.
with COVID now, we have huge tent cities because there, of course, if you're in a shelter, you don't want to be with COVID and getting contracted. So, I mean, there are sections of our city now along highways that are just full of tents. And I'm just like, so here's our visual. Literally, it's not hidden in a shelter way. It's not like right there off 277 and Davidson, Charlotte people.
Well, even so, the thing that baffles me with that, and this is I just started reading The Color of Law. I got that for my Audible book of the month, and it focuses on racist housing policy history. But we just it white supremacy is so insidiously built into our culture that we just had a court case happen, in which a immigrant who owns a business sued the city to have the tent cities removed because they looked unsightly.
Where are they gonna go?
And I just thought, right, and I was, but the combination of everything that was happening there, I was just like, whoa.
Yeah.
And so where I want to go with that, though, Vicki, is sort of talk a little bit more personally about what got you into housing justice, into urban planning, and sort of how you arrived here. What comprises of Vicki Fanibi and your experiences in America in 2020?
So my arrival at urban planning was, I have a great story about it. Mostly I was in civil engineering major. No, I have to backtrack a bit. So back in, I think it was my 6th or 7th grade year of middle school, I went to a summer camp. It's actually, this camp is so great. I hope it's still going on. Is at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, I think. And it was a women's science camp, engineering camp, like a STEM camp for the summer.
That's stinking awesome.
It was so great. I went 3 years in a row. And we got to make rockets. I got to learn about space travel. We played games. It was the ultimate camp. It was just you and your girls, like, okay, we're gonna build rockets, and then tonight we're gonna do karaoke. And it was just everything you could ever want at summer camp. And like you're just hanging out in a college dorm for
Ugh.
5 straight days. It was amazing. And it was
First of all, this is
there.
dope because rockets and women and representation. Whoa.
And a lot of the women who were camp counselors were international students at the university. So they were all women of color. It was
Oh, that's amazing.
it was phenomenal. Like what a camp.
So good. Oh,
I hope they're still going on. It was just unbelievable. Some of the best. It was only 15 days in total because I only went 3 times. Well, once I went back as a camp counselor. So actually, no, I went 20. It was 20 full days of being at the University of St. Thomas campus across 3 summers. Just the best thing to have happened to me because I met great friends there. I met people who none of us actually went into engineering, but it was such a foundational experience in which you have other women saying to you, a young girl of 13, 14, you can do whatever you want to. That whatever creative energy you have now, maintain it. Whatever goals you have for yourself, keep them, meet them. It's all possible. And it was the first time that someone had said to me, not on the basis of my gender necessarily, that like I can do whatever I want. That the things that I can attain don't have to be within the confines of marriage or motherhood. That I can have those things, but that like we didn't talk about that. It was more like here's something that you can do with your life that you will enjoy. And it was coming from women from all different parts of the US, all different parts of the world who said, yeah, like I did it. And so from that moment on, I wanted to be an engineer. I cannot do math. I'm bad at it. I'm also
you needed
really,
Chris to tutor you.
I'm also I'm real terrible at chemistry. And so I had a come to Jesus moment where I was sitting in my chem lab and I realized I don't know what any of this means. Like the way I'm doing these problems, nobody should trust me to do anything. Like I cannot do this. Yeah. So my roommate, who's also now my best friend, one of my closest friends, she said to me, Vicki, I heard of this community and regional planning program, which is just like civil engineering, but no math. And I was like, girl, yes. So the next day I called my dad and I said, I'm not going to be a civil engineer anymore. And he was like heartbroken because he had this dream of me achieving great things, making a lot of money. And I basically was saying on the phone, I'm going to be poor forever. Not true. But you just felt like that's okay. If you have immigrant parents, they only know engineering, engineering, law, doctor. If you don't do any of those things, your financial security up in the air. Like, I don't know. So I called him and I said, I'm not doing this shit anymore. And he said, I'm concerned. I said, okay. Hung up the phone. And then
so am I.
walked into the engineering. I don't remember which office it was, but I basically told my engineering student advisor, I'm not doing this. I can't. I'm switching. And then she said to me, I understand. But I think she also knew, like, this girl can't do this. Like, she really is so bad at math. So I switched over to community regional planning blindly. I just basically thought my roommate would never lie to me about what this is about.
It's my best friend.
Yeah, we love each other. So the following Monday, I started community and regional planning. And what a journey. Because I, like, one, everything about it resonated with me. And we weren't necessarily learning about equity at that point in time, because that didn't come for me until after I really graduated. But just thinking about how communities and cities are made, and how so much of what we now know to be a city or a suburb was such a massive departure from medieval cities, that those were incredibly walkable, compact spaces. And then you bring in the automobile, and suddenly we can go further. So why put people close together? And then you have the Second World War, where you have people coming back, and we're actually giving them money to move out to the suburbs. And I thought, wow, we really
White people.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, you're right. GI Bill was not available to Black people. Okay. Yes, but it was there that I thought we have the power as planners to develop beautiful, walkable communities that are focused on green space, and with that, we could be reducing. We could be improving our climate resiliency, making more sustainable places. And I thought, why the hell aren't we? And throughout the course of the next three and a half years, while doing planning, I was just inundated with all this information about, like, how do you plan for a community that is predominantly ESL, where not every person, or maybe not every person, speaks English. How do you develop community engagement plans for them? And so and I would say that at this point in time, my understanding of race and equity were not sophisticated. I wouldn't say they're sophisticated now, but they're better. So a lot of what I'm saying is in hindsight, right? That there were situations that I was a part of that were really shifting things for me mentally, where I was less focused on what I was when I was a civil engineer, which was make a lot of money, be really wealthy, get a fancy car, get a fancy house, visit resorts every single year with the money that I made being a really wealthy engineer. And it shifted towards living in a walkable community, engaging with my neighbors, ensuring that everyone has a chance to succeed, undoing the impact of suburbanization, and all those things. And so basically, I graduated from that program. But the final semester that I was there, I did an international planning course with a man named Francis Owoso, who is a really notable planner and lecturer, in which we were taught pretty much the same fundamentals of planning, where, this is how you meet the need of the community. Again, wasn't really focused on equity necessarily, but that's where I actually thought I could do this same work, but I could do it in international context. So I did my master's immediately after graduating, because I really was not about those community planning jobs locally. I really wanted to move abroad and study and do international planning. I decided to go directly to grad school and do my master's in international relations. And there I focused more on ungoverned spaces, so places that not necessarily are under the watch or the regulation of a government. Okay. So we're talking indigenous communities. I think that there's a lot to learn from them, as they do everything on their own. They are actively, they may not be staying in one spot, but I do find that there's a lot to be pulled from the experience of those who are able to regulate themselves, feed every single person in the community, everything else that a city does, just in a just drastically different context than what we have initially understood. But I would say that that's probably my weakest area. I would love to learn more about it, but I specifically wanted to learn more about informal settlements and how those operate. So during my time there in grad school, we were required to do an international internship. And so I emailed this woman named Teresa Williamson, and I said, I would like to come work for your organization in Rio. Would that be cool? And she said, yeah. So
I love it.
we did an interview, but she basically said, you know that you're not going to get paid? Me, yeah. When will you be able to come? June. Great. See you then. Okay. Fantastic. So I got on a plane, traveled to Rio, spent 2.5 months in Rio. Just the best thing I've done. When I look back, there are no negatives, right? So I was able to spend a summer in this sprawling urban space that was both residential and dense, but also you have favelas that are these people don't always have formal land recognition. So the government could raise them whenever they wanted to, but they hadn't yet, or they're actively seeking land tenure. But I mean, that's one aspect to it. But the part that was probably most impactful for me was recognizing that everything I had ever been taught about informal settlements and those who live in them was basically a lie. That the narrative to me had been, this is dangerous, don't go. Like before I actually left for Rio, people said to me,
quick question. So when you talk about informal settlements, would that be like the American equivalent of like living off the grid or something?
It's more like people mostly refer to them as slums.
Okay.
So yeah, a person will put up housing wherever they can. Mm-hmm. However, the person who runs this organization, so out of respect to her, I wouldn't call the favela a slum because she says that they're not the same thing. So I typically just say informal settlement because the land tenure, land rights are not always formally recognized, and that there's a lot of land speculation happening. So whether or not they're able to stay there permanently is really up in the air. And there's a lot of really great people who are working to advocate for these individuals, which is what I was doing in this at this NGO for the summer, is that we were doing community profiles. So my friends and I would travel, and they weren't friends initially. So these are just people that I met there, but we ended up really loving each other, and we still are in contact. And we would have to, we'd walk. So like, for example, we took a really long ass walk through the Tijuca forest to look for this elderly woman in a house where she had not had electricity for 5 years. The part that was really just insane was that she was living with her mother who had broken her hip a few years before. And so she was using a generator every single day, not to actually, have a working fridge, not to do anything that would require electricity. It was more so to make sure that this woman could stay alive. And the government did not want to recognize her property rights. So every day she was wondering, like, I don't know what's going to happen. And if she can't get property rights, she'll never get electricity.
Wow.
And so, and I mean, that's just one example. This woman is living in a very isolated space. We walked for like 2 hours trying to find her. We wondered the entire time. We don't know if she's actually out here, but I think that's probably part of the reason why she's able to stay for as long as she has. But you know that when they decide to build something there, she's going to be the first to be removed. And then you have other people who are living in much more densely or more compact areas, which again, the government isn't providing resources. So they're not providing electricity. They're not providing running water. But they're not living without those things. So what has happened is that the community has decided to provide it themselves. And so people will put the cords up. They will create, they'll get water running some way, somehow, because you have to. There has to be some level of creativity. I remember going through a favela, getting a tour from someone who has an organization within the favela, like an actual resident there. And she showed us their recycling system in which people did recycling by hand for every single person who lived in the favela. So we're talking about hundreds of people, right? And I have photos I can probably send, but you just have people sitting with these tubs and they're going through every single piece of trash, pulling out what can be recycled, because the city's not going to do it, but they wanted to do it themselves. These are incredibly sustainable spaces. And I left Rio thinking, okay, so I have my foundational experience from undergrad. I have what I picked up in my master's program, and then I have this experience face to face with these people who are vocalizing what they need. They're asking, hey, I need you, the government, to give me running water. I need you, the government, to give me electricity. And they're denied. And they need to, they do it on their own. And to me, that really parallels the US, in which people, and I'm thinking about the city council meetings you're talking about, Tommy, where you have people coming in, and talking to these, the planning commission, saying, you need to get this done, and it isn't happening. And then people will try and meet the need on their own, and then it gets struck down. And so part of what has drawn me to planning, or urban development, is that I think there are so many people who are living in a space in which they have been self-sustaining for so long and have been doing a pretty damn good job of it. But I don't think that is their job. I think that meeting your basic needs, especially when it comes to resources similar to electricity, clean water, green space, that shouldn't fall into the hands or onto the shoulders of the residents. It's something that the planner should be doing, should be advocating for you. So my long-term goal is to do this kind of work. I just don't really know what context it's going to be in.
Yeah.
But
it seems really complicated, and like we've created a system full of barriers to even begin to do something like that. So that was our part 1 of our conversation with Vicki Fanibi. You can follow Vicki on Instagram at IamNotVicki. And her latest project is the Urbanism Library. You can check that out also on Instagram at the Urbanism Library is that handle. For those who are interested in supporting organizations fighting housing insecurity, Feed the Movement CLT is a local organization here in Charlotte that is near and dear to our hearts. All the information will be listed in the show notes. And when we come back for part 2, we'll be talking about community engagement, how you can get involved, and as always, the intersections of spirituality into the conversation. See you soon.
community engagement, it's something that is becoming increasingly popular in the US. So we have, there's lots of tools that are becoming more widely used. You have something like Bang the Table, which is like an online community engagement tool that I think you can create surveys, things like that. Or there's a big push for more transparent data. So a lot of the times people know what they're asking for, but they don't have the numbers to present. So there's organizations like Data Driven Detroit that has pulled together really extensive data on um, like the economy, housing, mobility, things like that. And anyone can take it and use it. But so much of the success of those tools come down, one, to how receptive planners are, and just how accessible those meetings can be. So, it seems so silly, but people don't always know how to get specific individuals involved. Like, you just assume that if you have a planning meeting at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday night, if Black people don't show up, it's because Black people don't care. But truly, it's because they're working. They have kids.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking about as you're sitting there saying that. I was like, so the people who really care and are passionate and want to be involved are the people who are trying to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And what you just said, have kids, have jobs, or who might not have transportation, or there might not be public transportation available to where the meeting is being held.
Right.
I'm sitting here processing because it was a lot of information, but it was a lot of really, really, really good information. Like we've never had a conversation on housing or planning this extensively in this space, and when we, and I think our culture is generally action oriented, and so people are always looking for tangibles of what is it that I can do in my journey of being anti-racist to begin to change some of these systems and structures. And so I guess, like, to the layperson that wants to get involved and wants to go to these planning meetings and has this time, what even do they need to know about, like, these meetings at the city level? Like, I don't even know where I would start there.
You should be able to access an agenda for those meetings, which is helpful. Unfortunately, not everyone posts them early enough.
Mm-hmm.
We got to shame those folks. Like, you shouldn't be posting the agenda for a planning meeting 2.5 hours ahead of time. On top of that, some people need to get a ticket to talk during a meeting. And sometimes they don't put those up early enough either, or they put it up too early and then it gets filled for someone who is at work. They can't fill it out. And it just, there's so many barriers to community engagement. So unless someone is consciously ensuring that it happens, it likely won't. So if we're trying to reach and get more diverse contributions to, for example, a new regional housing plan, if you're not actively going into those communities and you're just relying on planning or city council meetings, it's not going to happen. You need to meet people where they are to do this work. And not every planner is willing to put in that energy, unfortunately.
Does meeting people where they are, does that have to be from a planner's perspective or with a planner's particular skill set?
How do you mean?
Like, again, I guess, like, what, so, planners, they train and they know specific things to look for. And I guess what I'm hearing and what you're saying is we need to root into organizing, right?
Yeah.
Going to the ground level, and seeing what do communities need versus trying to maintain a separation or a distance. It's sort of like we carry over, like, from the evangelical world, the same white saviorism of missions work, right? And
Yeah.
and so, can anybody do this, or, like, what if someone wanted to organize around urban planning and assessing what neighborhoods might need to be better advocates of it? What do they need to have the skill set of a planner? Can a layperson jump into it? What would that look like even?
I would say that the skill set required of a planner is pretty amorphous, you know? Like I said before that there are people who don't like who view themselves as planners. I'll send you the link to this person, but there's this really great article from them where they talk about how they are a therapist to the city, that the city is their client. And that is not a view that is popular. I was really, really shocked when I saw it. It was so beautiful. But we should be viewing the people who become planners or the people who are related to planning, because I'm technically not a planner. Like I've done the coursework, but I have never served specifically as a planner. But I do think that I have the skills of a planner because I think that my focus on bettering communities and ensuring equitable growth in communities is what planners should be doing. And yeah, we should be tapping into organizing. There are so many people who are basically urbanists that they don't know it, but everyone has opinions about their city. And you have so many community leaders who may not be working at the courthouse, who may not be working at like in the planning division, but are able to do the work of a planner, if that makes sense. So you have people who have already engaged the community and they already have the information available. It's just a matter of us somehow connecting the two.
Interesting. One of the things that that I'm thinking about, and one of the reasons I think because I still go to a spiritual community, and Austin Channing Brown was with us last year, and we got into this conversation about organizing and how churches can step into their anti-racism journey around organizing. So whether that be organizing around housing, whether that be organizing around criminal justice reform, but specific, like, do you have one of the things we haven't talked about necessarily is sort of your spiritual journey, which is also an equally wonderful conversation. But do you think, a lot of people root into the spiritual aspect of these conversations on permission to be? Do you think that church spaces have a role in this work? And and traditionally in a lot of spaces they've been perpetuators of the harm.
Yeah. Okay. So this is going to be a hard question for me to answer, and it might be really circular, but
It's okay.
churches do perpetuate a lot of harm. I kind of hate the word gentrification now, but if we have to use the word, they are gentrifiers. So the city church that comes in, it's like, we got to save these poor folk. And then, you know. But I do think that in any community you have anchors. And sometimes the anchor is the community center. Sometimes the anchor is the library. And sometimes the anchor is the church. And the anchor is pretty much right where every person goes to receive assistance, goes as a safe space, what have you, whatever services they can provide, whatever role they're serving in the community. As Christians, like I'm not a Christian anymore, but I would say that so much at the time that I was a Christian, I thought about this all the time. Like, oh, what is motivating me to do this? And I ultimately decided that God wants me and demands of us to meet the needs of those who are less fortunate, those who are unable to necessarily meet it themselves presently. And I think the role of the church if I remember the question correctly, role of the church in urban planning.
These questions meander along, so let the answer meander. It's fine.
The role of the church in urban planning, I think, is just to ensure that equitable development happens. And I don't really know, like,
What
what
does that mean, though?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's complicated. Like, I really don't freaking know, because I'd like the church to have a more active role, since they are so present within these communities that perhaps need help the most. But I also don't want to fixate on that, as I do want there to be a separation between church and state. And I think to really place themselves as those who would distribute resources isn't always the best move. I don't know. It's to me, it's complex. I haven't really sat with this long enough. I always just thought that, like I said, God wants me to assist people in the ways I know how, with the skills that I have. And I think that would be the same calling for the church. I just don't know how they can do it in a way that feels less like missions work.
Yep.
Because I can easily see it becoming transactional.
Very much
Like,
so.
if you come to church on Sunday, we'll give you some food. Or if you come to church on Sunday, we'll like XYZ. I don't like that.
You said something so profound earlier, and I think it applies here. You said that you won't make money from helping people. And if the underlying motivation, which it so often is is to bring in resources, with the church is to bring in resources, if that's the underlying motivation, then of course they're going to approach it from a saviorism perspective.
It's true.
And so I think if churches or spiritual spaces, any spiritual space is going to step into this work, they have to be committed to an anti-racism journey. They have to be committed to disentangling their theology from the racist past, especially churches based here in the U.S. of America. They have to be committed to divesting from white supremacy and recognize that they have been the perpetuators of it, that they've, and so much of my learning this year in this pandemic season has been learning about how we organize around churches, essentially, to perpetuate harm to other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I just want to, what would you talk to us a little bit about your spiritual journey then? I'm just really curious about that, and hopefully we'll tie it back around. But I'm really, that's such an interesting. Where are you now with that? Or where are you journeying? What has the journey looked like? Not necessarily, I don't want to present it as
Finite.
tell us about the more. Yeah, tell us.
Yeah, like I've reached the end.
Yeah,
I made my decision. Every day is a new day to panic about your existence. So I realized a while ago, and I still have this fear, that much of my adherence to Christianity was based on a fear of hell. I don't like the idea of burning up for eternity. It scares the fuck out of me. And that's why, for so many years, I was just pray every day. If you don't, it's fine. But you got to pray even harder the next day. And then when I got to college, I drank for the first time. Oh, it was such a mess. I wish you all had been there. But I remember sitting on the curb, completely obliterated, and I looked to a friend and I was like, I need more Jesus in my life. And I was just like, you can't even enjoy your first drunken experience without panicking about damnation. You're pathetic.
Oh my god.
And
Me too.
Trauma.
and so I reverted back to what was very strict, like, don't masturbate, don't drink, don't think lustful thoughts of people, because you don't want to get banished to the underworld. And
Oh.
it's stress. It's stress. So at some point, and that was, two or 3 years ago, I really started assessing, like, am I even happy as a Christian? Are we able to be happy as Christians? Take away the whole we're being blessed thing. Take away joys of new life in Christ. Like, am I actually having a good time? Is this something I can really engage with? Or am I just scared of retribution? Am I terrified of meeting with a God at the gates of heaven and have him say, sorry, you can't come in? Like,
Oh my gosh. That
yeah,
I'm
guy.
resonating so
If
much
you
with
were
all
to
this.
die
Yeah.
tonight and appear before God, he should say, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say?
screw you. And then,
I don't believe in that God, y'all, so that's why I say that. My God is female, and yeah. So, but anyways, that's a
right.
different story. Your story, focus.
Well, like it for then it, so basically what happened is that I started reassessing what I even liked about Christianity, and it was not a lot, truthfully. Like, I think for a lot of people, they can say, well, Christianity or going to church taught me a lot about giving back to others. I didn't get that. Christianity didn't teach me anything about racism and how to handle that within the community, the supposedly diverse community. It didn't teach me a lot. And I could talk about other things that like really fucked me up, which was how my parents weaponized God to try and form me into a person that I'm not, like all that stuff. But at some point, I just said, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not having a good time, which probably could be the worst reason to ever give up Christianity. Like, this sucks. I'm out. But that's what happened to me.
I think there's something intuitive in that, though, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, I've always had a hard time engaging with church. I have a hard time sitting and listening to a sermon. It feels like I'm being talked to when I think that there should be a horizontal structure in which everyone's just talking and learning from each other. That this person supposedly is the only person I could gain information from. It just it never sat.
Horizontal structure. Yes.
I fucking love it. Like, think about you and your friends, right? Meeting up on a Sunday. Like, you guys are all the same faith, and this is your church. You guys just talk about it. And it's possible that I could still have been a Christian had I had that upbringing, but I'm having a very hard time shifting into something like that.
Yeah.
Because I've been so disconnected from the Bible for so long. And I also kind of just don't want to read the Bible. I don't want to read it at all. I
don't either.
I mean, well, people served God before the Bible existed, technically. So
it's true.
And the translation we have is not accurate.
It's a translation.
Translation.
So, you alluded to this earlier about your parents being immigrants. You technically fall into the category of immigrant as well because you came over to
age 2.
At 2, right? And so, how do you think that experience affected the spiritual teachings and practices as well? You mentioned, the church not teaching you about racism, and I guess like from an immigrant's perspective, what was that experience like?
Well, I guess it wasn't something that my parents really focused on. It wasn't high priority. Some of the earliest churches that I went to were predominantly Nigerian.
Okay.
And yeah, actually, the best church we had been to was a predominantly Nigerian church in downtown Minneapolis. And my parents plucked us from it. Actually, it was my dad. It was motivated by my dad. My dad has a tendency to attend churches, and then once he like beefs with someone, he just leaves. He doesn't really address the issue. So I've been to many, many churches. He loves beefing with people. So that it definitely contributed to my fall from Christianity. I don't want to call it a fall. My departure, I suppose.
Yeah, it's definitely not a fall. And even within, like, as you're saying that, like, I want, like we could introduce the whole conversation on patriarchy and
Yeah.
toxic male masculinity within that, and
yeah, it's just
conflict and
the the way evangelicals approach, or Nigerians, I can say, approach evangelism. I found that it was much more black and white to them than other evangelical churches that I went to. At least for the longest time, I thought it was, because not only was I trying to meet these Christian values, but there's also like Nigerian values that I had to hit, and so many of those values were supposedly motivated by our religious backing. So, like, I had churches that wouldn't let me enter if I didn't wear a hat, and I had pants on, and that's something that I thought was
absurd,
pretty sexist.
It's absurd.
Yeah,
but that's all they knew, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's all I knew. Like, growing up Jehovah's Witness, when I got baptized into the religion, my mom all of a sudden had to wear a headscarf if she was going to do anything spiritual in front of me, and that was like some of my formative examples of how women exist in the church. And when I reflect on it, it's just absolutely disgusting. Like, I came out of this woman's body, and now she's having to do postures in a or act in a way that defers to her 12-year-old child because he's on this spiritual, like, no.
It doesn't add up. Yeah.
Wow. And so we're gonna have you back, because there's even more that I like we could talk about. And
absolutely. Bring it.
Because it's like, how did that, like, we started talking earlier about like capitalism, and that's a major portion of this conversation. But I'm always fascinated how capitalism sinks into our religious and spiritual practices, and then also directs, like, where, like, okay, you need to go make money and do these things, and God's going to bless you. And
the church is a capitalist haven. It's like, why not be a capitalist? The church wants you to be.
You said something earlier that was really profound about capitalism, and I think it has really really powerful implications. Do you remember about what we were talking about earlier with consumption?
I wrote it down.
I did too.
What did I say?
You were saying that you said there is no ethical consumption under capitalism.
Oh yeah.
Can you unpack that?
Well, I'm basically saying that as much as you want to untether yourself from whatever structure you find to be unethical, you can't, because we're all owned by like 3 corporations that even if, for example, even if the item is prepared ethically in the United States, the materials for that may have been produced unethically. Or sometimes ethically produced items aren't exactly sustainable. And so, and then on top of that, I'm a person who's vegan. And so I was taught for the longest time that, like, me eating vegan, ethical, like top tier ethical consumption. However, I'm realizing in like the past couple of years, like the last 2 years that I've been vegan, that doesn't add up that I could be more sustainable or ethical in my practices if I stopped eating chia seeds and quinoa, which are imported, and actually ate locally produced beef, that like there's always going to be a tug of war with your decisions. And the thing that I don't like is that we're putting all this pressure on the consumer to make good choices and to be better when I think at our hearts know that it comes down to the corporations to change their labor chain.
That's profound. And so I guess in terms of that, when we place housing in a model of capitalism and we think in terms of progress, where are we going? And like, I know that's a massively big question, but where do we even need to go? I mean, and you bring up the point so well, like, and I think when we talk about nuance, it truly is like this tug of war. When we think about rooting into anti-racism, when we think about co-conspiring and co-creating, and we have all these aspirational ideas, and when we go and evaluate the work, and we're like, shit, I'm still in this model of capitalism, and I'm still in this cycle of perpetuating oppression by my choices and how I show up. So I guess, how do these things, housing, planning, and capitalism, intersect? And what might you say is where we need to go to begin that pathway of liberation for people disaffected?
Capitalism, planning, and housing intersect because housing is viewed as something you earn versus something that you should receive as just as a human being. And so when you can put a price on something like that and ensure that it's the people are excluded from it, well, one, we're like only increasing the value, but also we're creating a system in which so many people lag behind, are unable to access this, what I consider to be a right.
Yeah.
Where we're going, nowhere fast. Gonna be honest. I don't foresee this getting any better because as long as we continue to say that housing is the best investment you can make, that real estate is the best investment you can make, people are always going to be wanting to increase the value of their property. But affordable housing can't actually increase in value. It can't be a good investment because it wouldn't be affordable housing anymore. So now we're seeing, right, that all of these properties are increasing significantly in terms of cost, but the wages aren't matching it. And it's because it's like, we're like, yeah, duh, build up the value.
Yeah.
What I want to see happen is that we stop giving a shit about how much something increases in value. I don't care. That is not important to me. I don't even personally want to own property. I don't care that much about it. I think it's kind of like cool, but until people rid themselves of the rationale that your housing has to be a permanent investment, and that after that I need to purchase more so that I can rent it out to people and then supposedly provide housing to people, when really that housing, like, you didn't provide it. You're not providing housing. That already existed, loser. Like, you're just making it inaccessible to individuals. You're putting it at a high price so that you can make a profit. So until like I said, people rid themselves of the notion that all real estate needs to be profitable, and then we start prioritizing housing people before making money. And when we start to consider that inclusive development, inclusive growth, inclusive everything starts by making sure that every single person in the community is safe. Every single person in the community has their basic needs met. And every single hierarchy, whatever tool that you use to measure this, always says that people need to be housed first.
I mean,
And so-
Maslow's
Maslow's like
in
get the
nursing,
people
like
in
shelter.
houses.
It's the basic human needs for survival.
So but the issue is that, one, people are not becoming anti-capitalists fast enough for my liking. And, I didn't become an anti-capitalist formally until last year. And frankly, I was a little slow myself. So if we could all just hurry
I'm
this
still slow.
up.
I'm still working through it, and I'm still trying to understand it and have the language
Tommy,
for it.
capitalism can eat my ass. It sucks.
So, what helped you get there? Were there resources that you recommend?
Honestly, it was people on Twitter shouting at me. Not at me specifically, but shouting. Like they're saying, you cannot be XYZ if you're not an anti-capitalist. When I thought, and part of it also is me just being living in DC, being a young professional, and I'm looking at the cost of all these apartments, and I'm like,
I can't afford this shit.
Which is, I think, pathetic, right? Because I've never actually had to consider the cost of housing. I thought that I could just go into Trulia or Zillow and say, okay, this is my budget, in unit washer and dryer.
Done.
And then it was just, you can't afford jack shit. So I'm just, okay, if I cannot afford this, if I am struggling, I'm seeing someone who works at Subway, someone who works at a small shop. I don't know how they're doing any of this. And people don't care because we just say they should go live elsewhere. Like, I know I could get cheaper housing living in rural Michigan, but girl, I don't want to live in rural Michigan. I want to live in DC. So you better find me some cheap ass housing because I cannot do this for a long time. And it is the responsibility of the municipality, of the state, federal level. Like, we need to ensure that people are getting housed. That should not be up for debate. And the fact that people are upset because, and Trump saying that we're trying to ruin your suburbs, he's just saying we want to protect these white spaces from, these dangerous Black people who are in public housing. And so definitely there's a stigma about public housing. Absolutely. There's a stigma about low-income individuals because we see that poverty is a failure, a moral failure, versus just something that comes from the environment that you're in, that no matter how much you work, how much you try, you may still be poor.
Yes.
Preach.
And all of these things are interconnected. All these services are interconnected. So when we talk about, like, for example, we discuss housing first and then dealing with addiction later when it comes to housing those who are unhoused, we're saying, like, you got to earn it first, which to me, like, I don't think that should be the case. I think it should be the opposite. Like, we should really just be putting people into homes. You can't address these mental blocks until you are in a safe space.
Yeah.
And so
the healing can't begin. Like, and I used this example a couple weeks ago when I was just thinking, like when somebody has a trauma, we have to create the conditions for healing. Sometimes that means we have to break a bone and reset it, or we have to pin something, and so I'm down with we're having these conversations surrounding like sloganeering and things of defund the police, and I'm like, yeah, we need that. We need radical. We need to burn it down, and we're not talking about literal fire. I don't know, maybe.
So we could
be, right? But it does it. The more and more that I have these conversations, the more I talk about it, I don't see any other way than to root out. It's like there's a dark not, I don't want to say dark, but like anti-blackness coming out right there. But
Mm-hmm.
there's this low vibrational energy that keeps us holding on, and is rooted in trying to find security, really. But we have an abundance, as you stated earlier, in which
Mm-hmm.
we can provide for everybody. We just don't want to, or
Mm-hmm.
we're so selfish that
Mm-hmm.
we we think that we need to be more flashy than other people. And so
Well,
and I think
it's in our
Isabel
DNA.
Wilkerson Cast is really helping
Mhm.
me kind of uncover that. Her book Cast right now is really helping put a
Mhm.
lot of that in perspective. So
It's
I
on my
highly recommend.
stack.
Yes.
I
Where are you
actually
saying,
got
Becca?
both her books. I just haven't gotten around to them. They're dense.
But she is a freaking phenomenal storyteller. I'm just sitting here like wrapped. I don't even realize sometimes I'm listening to a whole history lesson. The way that she weaves in these stories, I'm just like,
Damn.
wow. Yes, Black
Mhm.
women. Yes.
Yes, get it.
What were you saying, Becca?
Oh, I was just saying it's when you were talking about it being rooted in it's literally in the DNA of this country, and that's why I do believe it has to be burned down
Mm-hmm.
because it the roots are tainted.
Mm-hmm.
They are literally tainted, and it's not something fire comes to cleanse, and we
Mm-hmm.
have to. It's just what it is. Like we're not gonna. Capitalism isn't gonna go away without a huge shift, and some level playing fields knocking us white people off of our asses. It just, and I'm not wanting the lives, but to be to take lives, but at the same time, there are hundreds of Black lives that are dying every day,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like, or more than hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
I don't want lives to be taken, but I sure as hell don't really give a shit about property.
No.
Well,
Dang
I mean, I sat here trying to think is like, well, if one person buys a house, then they would have the government should make it a rule that they have to, buy a certain amount of land for, but like it just gets so mumble jumbled and it gets so messy. Like I'm just like it's clean slate.
Yep.
Just clean.
Yep.
So I
There's too
think,
much. There's too much white patriarchy or
Mm-hmm.
white.
but even within all that, like you being here today, Vicky, has given the listeners some deep things to think about and
Mhm.
to be disrupted by and how we exist in our system. And
Mhm.
I think the most profound thing for me, though, that you said was talking about just being able to be in the experience of summer camp and be around women who were for you and have that example and have that representation and have that support to say you can do this thing and speak that into you.
Mhm.
um, and I firmly believe that anything that we co-create from this point on is only going to be rooted in the relationships and how we're able to leverage those relationships and the
Mm.
representation within those relationships. And so if anybody takes anything out of this conversation today, you said it was 20 hours over 3 years, just 20 hours. Now, of
Well,
course,
20 days.
20 days, sorry, 20 days
But over
over
3 years.
a 3-year span. That's less than a month. And I know that like there was planning that went into that, but it changed your entire trajectory
Mm-hmm.
and the knowledge that comes alongside that. Um, and I think that it is so important when we think about and we have conversations about opportunity and access that we see. To me, that's a testament to the power of having access to
Mm-hmm.
spaces and influence in spaces. And I think that you're just in spaces that you're transforming the world. So, and I just love you.
I adore you.
All right, y'all. That's our conversation for today. Vicky, come back because
Yeah.
we have a lot more
Yes,
learning.
please.
Oh yeah, that was fun. I'd be happy to come back. I'll come crawling back into your inbox sometime soon.
Yo, that was our show. Thanks for listening to Permission to Be. Thank you to our guests. So if you want more information, head on over to permissiontobepodcast.com to check out the show notes, get some more information on our guests that we post over there. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, leave a rating. If there's somebody that you want to see on this podcast telling their story, we also want to hear from you. So make sure to connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, Permission to Be Podcast, and we'll see you soon.